So the city came up with a regulation. The initial drafts were an existential threat to our company. Basically, we would have not been able to operate.
Short-term rentals in the city of Houston will be regulated for the first time.
While some of these local politicians may be very well intentioned, they're not going to have the time or bandwidth to really understand your business. We do this for a living. It's not a hobby. And yet I think a lot of them see it as something that's discretionary. Oh, you don't have to rent out your property as a short-term rental. They're very much tainted, I think, by some of the media messaging. If there's a story in the press, it's about a nightmare short-term rental, there's been a party or a crime committed.
Airbnb rentals are popular around Metro Atlanta, but from shootings to thefts, guests continue to violate policy. So should the home sharing platform stay or should it lock its doors for good?
Local politicians can think that's sort of the norm rather than it being the absolute kind of exception. As an operator, you sort of need to mobilize and show up and speak and give them the other side of the story.
Property management at scale is about more than just rent rolls and maintenance calls. It's about protecting your assets, delivering stellar guest experiences, and scaling operations without losing quality. Welcome to Minute by Minute, the show where industry leaders share unfiltered stories, proven strategies, and real solutions for operating at scale. I'm your host, Nils Mattisson, CEO of Minut, and together we will dive deep into what it really takes to keep your properties safe, efficient, and protected. Let's get started. Today I'm joined by Sebastian Long, founder and CEO of Lodgeur, a company that's rethinking how multifamily real estate and hospitality intersect by turning apartment buildings into professionally operated, on-demand lodging. By letting empty apartments to renters looking for furnished apartments on flexible terms, Lodgeur helps owners increase cash flow and overcome the revenue drop from void periods. Sebastian is also the founding president of the Texas Short-Term Rental Association, a nonprofit trade association that represents professional short-term rental stakeholders throughout the state of Texas. With a background spanning banking, consulting, venture-backed hospitality, and PropTech, Sebastian brings uniquely structured yet creative lens to scaling regulated environment. In this conversation, we'll explore the evolution of multifamily hospitality, the decision to build a design-forward B2B2C model, how regulation and professionalism are reshaping the industry, and where Sebastian believes short-term rentals are heading next. Sebastian, welcome to Minute by Minute. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invite. Excited to be here.
Let's start with your journey. You worked across banking, consulting, venture-backed hospitality before founding Lodgeur. How did those experiences ultimately lead you into building the company that you're building now?
Yeah, of course. I think it's probably worth noting I actually kind of grew up in hospitality. My parents decided the year I was born to kind of launch a campground in France where my mum's from. And so I grew up, with tourists all around me on holiday. And as soon as they would let me sort of work for them, the summer I turned 13, I worked there every summer, starting out in the kitchens, kind of scrubbing dishes. And, by the time I was at university, sort of managing day-to-day kind of operations, managing the front of house team, both for food and beverage and the front desk. Then I think, like a lot of entrepreneurs, they sort of said you should, go find a stable job. And I got a job in the banking world, but I got to do something which I'd been, really looking forward to, which is to do that overseas. So I got a job for a bank where they would move me around every 18 months or so to a new country. And they say, you're going to this country, you're going to do this job, which is great for someone who doesn't quite know what they want to do, because I got to see a lot of the world. And through that time, I actually lived in serviced apartments or corporate housing, as it's known in North America. So I got to experience, I guess, that kind of product as a user. And I think when you're sort of traveling the world away from home, sometimes you can have some strong reactions to certain things. And for me, like, my home environment became sort of very important. Like, it was sort of my sort of nest or cocoon away from everything else. So I remember one place I even had all the furniture taken out and bought my own furniture, decorated it to make it feel like a sort of a great place to come back to. And I tried to leave banking a few times. Once was to go back and help my family in 2013, but living and working with a lot of family members is a little bit tough. And so I went back to school, and one day I saw a LinkedIn post looking for MBAs with a background in hospitality, and I'm like, great, that sounds like me. And it was a job posting for Sonder to become the GM, launching them in the kind of UK market. So I got to kind of escape banking finally, and to launch a new business with somebody else's money and kind of assistance, which is a lot easier than doing it by yourself, and maybe kind of gave me a little bit, quite a bit of confidence to go and launch out for myself when I moved to the US in 2018.
There's been a common theme, I think, with a lot of the people on the podcast who have had jobs in hospitality early on, especially like frontline staff. And I think those types of experiences, they really help shape you for life. And that's something that you can take with you even into management. So I'm not surprised to hear that you've also been in the kitchen washing dishes. And the Sounder gig sounds very very interesting. I mean, there's nothing like being an entrepreneur, and most of us are doing it for the first time. You're learning everything. So of course, being able to sort of try it, especially trying it at scale with an existing model, I can see how that brought you into entrepreneurship. So what was the decision then after Sounder to start your own company instead? Like, what sort of triggered that?
Yeah, so a number kind of things happened between being at Sonder and leaving Sonder. So when I was there at the time, they had 700 units. They'd just kind of gone through their Series B, and they sort of recognized that the quality of some of their units wasn't maybe great, and so they were going to refurnish 400 of the kind of 700. And I was in the headquarters in San Francisco speaking to, project lead and some of the C-level people. And I kind of said, you're doing this because you think you'll make more money if the units look better. And they said, yes. I go, well, how much more money? And nobody had an answer for that. They were going to spend millions of dollars. And that kind of really bugged me. And at the time I was doing an executive MBA at Cambridge, and we had to find basically a research project to do essentially for our thesis. And, this bothered me so much that I decided to kind of research it. So initially I'm looking at the business and kind of academic literature to see if anything has been quantified, and I could not find anything. Yet you can find articles that say a 1% improvement in your customer experience score will lead to a 1.42% improvement in RevPAR. That was a Cornell study. So I was sort of trying to find a way to quantify something that I think we all know is obvious. A nicer looking place is more likely to get booked and to make more revenue. And so I created this sort of online experiment, got hundreds of people to click through all these different types of listings, and the software churned out a figure. And the figure was a lot higher than I would have imagined. Essentially, there was up to 50% more as what people would pay to upgrade from an average looking property to like the best looking property. And that's trying to control for size. Like it's not like from going from a flat to a 5-bedroom pool villa, right? It's actually, if you make that space look nicer. And so I was armed with this kind of insight. I was migrating to the US after marrying one of my classmates I met at business school. And while I'm waiting for my green card, I did what you're not meant to do as an entrepreneur, which is to spend a very long time planning things because I wasn't legally allowed to work. And I'm starting to connect the dots. I don't want to go back and work for a bank and wear a suit. It's way too hot in Texas to have to wear a suit and go to an office. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I was passionate about hospitality, and I had my experience with Sonder, so I felt like, okay, I felt like I knew what I was doing, and so that's how I got started. So Lodgeur was founded with an idea that design can be a differentiator, and that it's something that's undervalued because it's not tangible. You can't put a financial number on it. And I felt like, that was sort of our secret sauce, is that, yes, we could make more money because we're going to deliver properties not only that look nicer, that convert better, but also are kind of comfortable and practical for somebody's stay. Design isn't just how it looks, it's how it makes sort of people feel.
It's a super interesting way to look at it, because of course it's something we all know, but quantifying it is something altogether different. What might be true for you in your business is not necessarily like translating to somewhere else. So I think that level of like data fluency is pretty rare to see in this industry, right? Like people know whether they're operating in the high luxury segment, and they will invest to differentiate their experience, or they are just trying to get like the sort of cheapest 2-bedroom that you can find on booking.com. But of course, like it is there is a lot of space in between where the question is like exactly, how much should you invest to get like a good ROI. Another aspect of your business is, of course, you're serving both the building owners and also guests. What sort of tensions arise when you're designing for two customers at once?
One of the things we kind of realized, I think, especially in the kind of post kind of COVID environment, we didn't realize we were a B2B2C kind of business. Initially we were so focused on the guest, but actually we were serving somebody else's purpose. The properties we're working with, they are very concerned, of course, about being able to make money. So NOI, net operating income, is their sort of North Star. And so I think that by starting to reframe how we work with these partners, initially, traditionally in this space, you would be renting the units, you'd be a tenant of your landlord. And what we found through COVID, essentially, we were shutting down a location. We were very close to kind of bankruptcy after shrinking 92% in 3 months. And we didn't know where we were going to store this furniture that we had. And we'd had a property owner that had been kind of quite flexible with us. And I don't know where, but we just had this crazy idea. Instead of paying for warehousing, why don't we just store excess furniture in your properties and kind of split the money that kind of comes in. And that worked. We went from 3 units with that partner to around 70. We'll probably have potentially up to 100 with them this year. And a lot changes when you sort of flip that relationship from tenant landlord to being partners. Suddenly you're both trying to grow the business. You're trying to find ways to work together to deliver an outcome that works for both of you. And so I think that was a kind of key realization, is we're going to have to work together because they still control a lot of aspects of the kind of guest experience. And that could be as simple as, if there's a key pickup, where do guests pick up their keys? And I can tell you, like, some of the places where people have made companies like us put their lock boxes. Sometimes it's like, literally by all the building's trash. Or other times you sort of have to cross where all the cars are coming in and out of. So right from that to how quickly are problems fixed? So if the air conditioning in the building is having issues, are they going to be fast about it? Because our guests have higher expectations than a long-term tenant would in that building. So things work best when we're both working together. So that's how it came across. Other kind of tensions. So in the vacation rental market, traditionally you're taking somebody's property and it's already furnished. There's a lot of tension there, for example, with making sure that the owner keeps things in good condition, that they replace items, maybe that they kind of invest. And one of the things we did very early on is we kept control of all of that. So we are getting these apartments, they're empty. We do all the design and procurement and installation. And if something needs to be replaced, we're not going and asking the owner every time for something. Because every time you remind them of a cost, that's sort of negative. But B, also, by maintaining that control, we make the decision, is this item too worn for kind of hospitality grade? And so we put that on our side of the ledger. There are risks, of course, but I think there's rewards from having as much control as you can over the guest experience.
And frankly, it sounds like a better alignment of interest. Like if you look at Sonder, for example, but many others, since you have that experience, if you sign a fixed income lease with a landlord, they sort of don't have the incentive to improve the guest experience or improve your revenue. So is it fair to say that your model has aligned incentives between stakeholders better than maybe traditionally?
Correct. So on our revenue sharing agreements, our aim is to be able to deliver above market rents wherever we can. But the reality is often we're competing with zero because these units are often sitting empty. And so we can beat zero any day of the week. And we've done it in a way where we can set up these properties without requiring any capital from the owner, because we're going to recoup that from the cash flow. So that makes things easier for ourselves, because essentially we've created a secured receivable where we've put the money up front, but we're getting repaid for it over a fixed period of time. But that being said, look, we do also have some of these master leases where we are a tenant. I'd say that we've taken a more kind of commercial-minded approach with them, so they are longer terms, and they also include provisions to try and defend against some of the things that can go wrong. So one of the big things in Texas, for example, is does the air conditioning work? Because if it doesn't work, it's going to be absolutely miserable. So we have had these leases, we've had language in there that says if the AC doesn't work, we don't pay rent. If none of the elevators work, we don't pay rent. Because again, that creates an incentive to kind of fix things. It protects us from some of the downside risk, the operational things that can go wrong. And of course, we have other clauses, based on the kind of gray hairs that we've gained when COVID happened and everything else. And actually, we've had to enforce, unfortunately, some of these kind of claims. And Minut actually helped us with some of that. Buildings AC went down, and a lot of units had major issues. And so we used the data that Minut provided in terms of temperature and humidity to provide a file to the owner and say, look, this is how uncomfortable conditions were. And I think that got us like a $25,000 rebate last summer, for example. So creative ways that we've been using our Minut sensors.
I love hearing about that. Thank you so much for sharing. I wish we had this conversation when we signed our lease for our Minut office in London, because I don't think there has been a single week where both the AC and the elevator was working at the same time. Yep. We wouldn't have to pay rent.
No, those are the biggest kind of headaches. So yeah, and big buildings, the elevators often don't work. That's what we've discovered.
What other things did you bring from Sondre in your early career, like lessons, positive or cautionary, that shape how you build Lodgeur today?
So, especially after when COVID happened, we were still getting people who were booking, and they were booking longer stays. And we sort of realized how you equip a place for a longer stay is going to be different to when you have a far more transient business. So pre-COVID, we would turn a unit 7 times a month. Now it's potentially only an average of twice a month. So people are staying much longer. So how you equip a space for people who are essentially temporarily living there is very different. And so I was kind of able to think back to, when I was living in this kind of accommodation, what was frustrating? What did I like? What do I wish would have been kind of different? And so kind of combining that along with a change in kind of clientele, we kind of invest a lot more, for example, in what goes in a kitchen. Most of the items that you find in a Lodgeur apartment is either in my house or has been tested in my house at some kind of point. So I think that having been an expat for many years, we've tried to create somewhere that you don't have to go out and replace all the furniture or fully equip the kitchen just because what you've got is so miserable. So that's probably one thing I would take, is having lived the experience.
Yeah, you remind me actually, like when I moved to California, I was also put up in corporate housing for, I think, a month or 2 months or something. And it was a really nice apartment, and it was really nicely kitted out. But of course, once you got your own flat, I moved into my flat and I realized I had absolutely nothing. And I went from this like very nice apartment in like a nice, this was the high rise, but quite high with a good view, into like a flat in Mountain View. And I think I only had a mattress for the first few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, we've all been there. Yeah.
Yeah. Apart from Lodgeur, you're also running the Texas Short-Term Rental Association. So you see a lot around policy and regulation taking place. So from your vantage point, where do you see that operators and regulators clash the most?
From what I've seen, from I guess being in the trenches in Houston over the past 18 months, so the city came up with a regulation. The initial drafts were an existential threat to our company. Basically, we would have not been able to operate. And so we've spent a lot of time speaking to city council, to their administrative departments. And what we've kind of found overall, and I think this has been true in the other markets as well, is that while some of these local politicians may be very well intentioned, they're not going to have the time or bandwidth to really understand your business and other operators' business, because the reality is it's not just one type of business. There's many different types of business models, even, who owns the properties, who operates them, what are the agreements that you have in place, who are the property owners. So we work with very large properties that often will have institutional owners. That's very different to someone who has a vacation home and wants a little bit of extra income because they're not using it most of the year. And we find even that regulators don't understand that some of these businesses like ours are mid-size or actually kind of quite large and very professional. We do this for a living. It's not a hobby. And yet I think a lot of them see it as something that's discretionary. Oh, you don't have to rent out your property as a short-term rental. And they're very much tainted, I think, by some of the media messaging. So more often than not, if there's a story in the press, it's about a nightmare short-term rental. There's been a party or a crime committed. You hear the neighbors complaining, or they're being interviewed on TV. That sort of narrative that's sort of in the media paints local politicians can think that's sort of the norm rather than it being the absolute kind of exception. And when you get a few angry neighbors who show up at these city council meetings and give these local politicians an earful, they think it's a problem that they need to kind of resolve. And so they can take a pretty heavy-handed approach at doing that. And so as an operator, you sort of need to mobilize and show up and speak and give them the other side of the story and explain that, look, these are terrible events. None of us operators want to have a party at our house. And there's still a perception that we're enabling parties as short-term rental operators. And so my greatest, I guess the thing that I've really discovered is I wish I'd done this sooner. I wish we'd gotten organized and started showing up and speaking. But, late is better than never, of course. So that's sort of what I've learned, is that you can make an impact. A few people showing up can make an impact and can fix some of the bad work that could put you out of business if politicians enable policies that, while well-intentioned, aren't in the public interest.
We see regulation showing up in so many places across the world, and I think there has been cases where it really has wiped out businesses. For example, we had new regulation coming into Austria this year. We saw one of our biggest customer there essentially lose half of their portfolio, and the company unfortunately didn't really survive. And I don't think that was the intention from the politicians when they enacted it. So hopefully we'll see a bit more balance going forward. How do you think about long-term regulatory risk when deciding how to grow Lodgeur?
So there are kind of certain markets we've already kind of thought we wouldn't really want to operate there. So, for example, there are some places where it's very difficult to remove somebody if they don't want to leave. There's a lot of protections which are sometimes granted automatically. You've been in this property a certain number of days, therefore you now have tenancy rights. Texas, fortunately, is a little bit more gray in that area. There's more around intent. Are you establishing a residence or are you kind of transient? So that's making us focus on Texas right now. From our Textra perspective, the Texas Short-Term Rental Association, we and our kind of members could continue fighting at all across the state, in different cities, different counties. But what if we could change things at a higher up level? What if we could get a state bill passed that basically puts in place a framework to try and prevent bad regulation happening? So as we've recently expanded out of our home market into a suburb of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and every single area is going to have different kind of regulations. And so if you're a business that's trying to grow, imagining just going to another city in the States and having to operate in a different way. I mean, I know that Europe has a reputation for being bureaucratic, but let me tell you, Texas and the US are far more bureaucratic than most people kind of realize. So if we can have a framework that allows us to kind of expand in markets without having to completely change our business model or operating practices, that to me is something that has long-term value for the industry.
Yeah, I guess regulation often starts sort of bottoms up, and you start seeing individual counties and cities making up their own rules. But we have exactly the same issue in Europe, where it's very different in different parts of Spain, for example. Like, it's basically not legal anymore in Barcelona, but in Cantabria they have a completely different view, and again in Andalusia. And I think you're right. I think it's inevitable that eventually it moves to state level, and in Europe maybe even European Union level. But that takes a lot of time. So
it does.
I just hope that the industry will fare well in the years in between. Let's talk a little bit about tech, because you're obviously on the frontier here and adopting tech enthusiastically. And you've also confided that you're on your 4th PMS. We're not going to go too much into that, but most people wouldn't have endured that. So how do you see tech in hospitality, and how you find the right balance between people and AI?
So, technology has been around quite a while. My parents implemented their sort of PMS in the early 90s, and I was really happy because it meant we got a computer at home, so I could sort of use it when it wasn't being used by the business. And I think there's a lot of hype around what tech is going to do, but I think in hospitality you have to be a very strong kind of operator. You can't. AI is never going to clean a room or do things like that. So to me, it's about how do we make it easier to do the kind of the mundane, the repetitive kind of stuff, so that we can focus more on the hospitality. And I think sometimes there's this sort of very traditional view of hospitality, that hospitality has to be in person, that it has to be high touch. And actually, sometimes to me, luxury is not needing to speak to a person, because things just work. You can get into the property without speaking to a human. You don't even need to message, because everything is there as it should be. So that to me is, if you can create an experience where someone doesn't have to contact you. If someone has to contact you about something, it usually means you failed further upstream. So how can technology do that? So on the one hand, it's simple things like a booking comes in, you create an access code for that guest, and maybe it's embargoed until the kind of requirements that you have to fulfill. So it could be collecting ID in Europe, or maybe you just want to collect some of that kind of marketing information. If that can be done automatically without a human's intervention, then that person can spend more time doing other things. I think that the rise of kind of AI agents is super exciting. I think in some ways they can definitely maybe be a little bit friendlier than the person who is having to tell someone, the Wi-Fi password for the 12th time that day, or, AI doesn't usually have a grouchy day, right, where things are kind of going wrong. So I think guests will have a little bit more like that, and we'll have a bit of a better experience. But it also means that the humans have got more time to do high value added activities. So they can spend more time on the telephone with the guest if that's what they need, because they're not harried creating codes and copying and pasting information from left to right. And one of the challenges of tech is that a lot of it is sold as integrated, but the reality is there are only often partial integrations. So maybe one system sends data, but it's not going to receive data back. Even with Minut, for example, is you have a noise sensor, which is great, but if it goes off at 2 a.m, does a human need to be there to kind of act on it, or can it automatically message a guest? And it's only going to be able to automatically message a guest if it's connected to your database of reservations. So that is, and Minut has some integration partners, but we, for example, had to build a custom integration with our PMS because Minut syncs with Airbnb, but it didn't sync with all our other reservations. So by doing that, AI, I think, is a lot easier now to connect different systems. So I'm not a programmer. I wish I was. I understand enough about tech to kind of be dangerous and know what I'd like it to do. But, now with AI, I've been coding little kind of applications, little kind of integrations. And that to me is kind of magical, because once you create that connection, then an AI agent can do some of that manual work sometimes that a human would have to do otherwise. So that to me is the kind of the real real premise, is that we create more time for ourselves to focus on hospitality and great experiences.
Yeah, you're really putting your finger on a couple of things that from a vendor perspective are difficult. I mean, we at Minut, we maintain something like 40 or 50 different integrations, and they're all point to point. So, we integrate with the PMS, and they're all slightly different. And I hope that as we move into more agentic workflows, where instead of just using software and dashboards, that we actually have agents working for us, that we come up with a better paradigm so that we can have agents from different companies coexisting and collaborating in a better way, in a centralized point. So you don't have to have all of these like one-to-one connections that inevitably end up being a lot to maintain. But the reality isn't quite there yet, and we're still signing up more PMSs, if you can believe it. So one day maybe we'll cover all 200 of them.
And it's funny because in my past, my past life, my banking life, I worked a lot on did a lot of business change projects, and there was always a technological element, and more often than not, it's people having to move data from left to right, for example. And actually, since we're talking about how did my background influence Lodgeur, I spent the last few years working around kind of financial crime in the banking world, so how to prevent it, and in particular, working for a private bank, understanding who the clients are and making sure you have due diligence. I didn't think that would be particularly helpful in hospitality, but actually, because of the partners we work with, which have these large apartment buildings, they're very concerned about who's coming in, because there's a lot more risk when you have hundreds of people in a building. And so, from day one, we were screening our guests. We were, even looking at Google searches and are their names coming up in negative news and things like that. So a lot of the challenges in industries, I think, are quite universal problems. And so again, in a very strange way, my banking kind of career prepared me for kind of hospitality, for fixing these kinds of issues, because they're sort of high transaction volume businesses where you have to get it right every time. It doesn't matter that you got it right yesterday for that other customer. You have to get it right today for this other customer.
Yeah, that's another area where I think the world has really moved on a lot. Like I remember opening a bank account in America. This was before the financial crisis, and I, as a European, I didn't have a social security number, but I had a paycheck. I had like a physical paycheck, and I walked into the bank and I was trying to open an account. And I got stumped by this box where they wanted me to fill in the social security number, and I said I don't have one. And the clerk sort of leaned in a little bit, and he's like, "Can you just make one up?"
Yeah, they had the field; it just needed to be entered to tick a box. Yeah.
So looking a bit ahead, so we're in a time where a lot of things are changing. So it might be daunting to look 5 years out. But what do you believe that most operators and property owners are not preparing for that's coming?
There's a kind of quote often attributed to Jeff Bezos. Most people are concerned about what's going to change in the future in 5-10 years, but he was kind of more interested in what isn't going to change, what are the kind of universal kind of truths. So when we sort of look ahead, that is more what I'm trying to kind of think. I'm trying to think, okay, where do we want to be in 5 years? What opportunities can we kind of take care of? I think obviously regulation continues to be a threat. That's why I've gotten kind of more involved, and because if you're not proactive, then it's going to happen to you. I think in terms of technology, look, it's going to make things easier, but more technology always throws up other kind of issues. As an entrepreneur, I've kind of found that, you kind of spend your time fixing things, and, we'll have fixed a bunch of things in 5 years, but we're going to have other things to kind of fix. That to me is the constant. You're always trying to get better. And, one thing I kind of learned, having, seen my family's business over, 40 kind of plus years, is that every year you have to get better, because people expect a little bit more, a little bit more comfort, a little bit more this. And so you can't stand still. So in 5 years, I would like our standards to, continue being higher. Our standards, last year's standards aren't good enough for this year. And the standards in 5 years' time, again, well, I think we'd look back at how we do things today and kind of be a little bit embarrassed. That's my hope, is that we keep getting better. So that to me is how I kind of think, into the future. How can we keep getting better at what we do? That is, again, the constant that you need to keep changing, right? You need to keep improving things.
I think that's a good point. And I think this industry in particular is actually raising the bar quite fast. Like if you think about Airbnb in the early days, you might have booked something with the expectation that it's going to be quite a lot cheaper than a hotel. But you didn't have that much expectation in terms of cleanliness and convenience. Whereas today, if you checked in, and there are dishes in the dishwasher or whichever, people would be upset. And I think that's collectively, like, we've raised the bar over the last 10 years. But ultimately, that's a good thing, right? Like if we all have higher standards and we deliver to them, I think that is what makes the world a little bit better, bit by bit.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree. I remember like scrolling through. I mean, it took me many years before I booked my first kind of short-term rental on Airbnb. I think it was about, I don't know. I think I opened my account in 2014. I think my first booking was in 2018. And even before I'd opened an account, I'd been sort of looking, but you can tell a lot sometimes by looking at the photos. Does that bed look comfortable? Are those pillows wafer thin? I think that sort of minimum entry level Airbnb is, you can't do that anymore. And I think, things may have been cheaper, but I think, again, now you're getting a very different kind of product. You can't say, well, that 5-bedroom villa is more expensive than a hotel room. It's like, well, of course it should be. So, how we see it is that we can deliver a product that is better value than a hotel room. I mean, we specialize in smaller properties, studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, especially if you're staying longer. Like it's a different sort of value equation. You got to factor in things like, do I have to eat out every night because I don't have a kitchen, and different aspects like that. So that's the kind of thing. I think it's one of those myths that, Airbnbs used to be cheaper. It's like, well, they probably did, but also in the past, many of them probably weren't paying taxes, be it hotel occupancy taxes or personal taxes. So that's part of why things got more expensive, because actually the playing field is being leveled with other businesses.
Yeah, as it should be.
Yeah.
If you were starting Lodgeur again today, what would you do differently?
I like to joke that I wouldn't be an operator, I'd be on the software side. A business that doesn't need to be 24/7. Definitely do not bootstrap a hospitality company. It's a terrible idea. So I think that's one of the things we would do differently. But kind of all jokes aside, when we kind of first launched, we took a very I wanted to do lots of tests, lots of experiments, because I had this sort of thesis that better design delivers results, and I was a little bit secretive about that sort of insight. But actually, the hard work comes into, okay, well, how do you achieve that, and how do you achieve that where you can still make an ROI? It's very easy to spend a lot of money setting up a property. It's a lot harder to make a property look great on the budget of on a lower budget. So one of the things I would have done from earlier days, we used to design every single property was a brand new design, even if we were having multiple apartments in the same kind of building. So I would probably standardize that a little bit more, so we didn't end up with a hodgepodge of different designs and furniture. It takes just as much work to use a design on one unit than it does to use it on 10 units in a building. So some of those things I would probably think a little bit bigger from day one. How could we think more sustainably, I guess, in terms of our operating model, to do things better. So that's probably the big thing I do differently, apart from not being an operator.
I think that's a pretty small thing. I think that means you got most things right, actually.
I guess we're still alive. So, I think that's the thing is you're going to make mistakes, so try and keep them small. Lots of small mistakes rather than kind of fatal ones. So
that's wise. And finally, what's the most unexpected thing that's happened while running Lodgeur?
Yeah, so I never imagined to have a sex toy policy as part of our operating kind of playbook. But yes, that's, it's something that's happened enough times that we've had to have a policy for our guests and for our staff. So that, I guess, is yet unexpected one. It still kind of amazes me how the industry still kind of thinks very much in kind of a siloed place. So we work with these large multifamily apartment buildings with usually hundreds of units in them, and our kind of deal time can be a year or 2 years to negotiate kind of some of these deals, and some of these units are sitting empty all that time while you're negotiating over terms and this and that, and you just think, well, if we moved quicker, everybody could have made more money. So that was one of the biggest kind of surprises is how people can sort of leave money on the table in business. When we kind of started Lodgeur. So yeah, that's not quite as fun as the first one, but yeah.
High and low. Yeah. It's a good point to end. Thank you so much for coming, Sebastian. It's a real pleasure. Good luck in the future, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Look forward to following the podcast.
Thank you for listening to Minute by Minute. If today's episode gave you fresh insight, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Share this episode with your team and follow us on social media to continue the conversation and exchange your own operational stories. To learn more about privacy-first property protection, visit minut.com. Until next time, make every minute count to maintain your property's safety.